The moment I walked into my own garage and found a $100,000 BMW sitting there like it owned the place, I knew my HOA Karen had finally crossed a line she couldn't wiggle out of. I'm Jake Morrison, electrician, single dad, and a guy who worked way too hard to buy a house where I could finally breathe. Willowbrook Estates looked like the perfect suburban landing spot when I first moved in. Clean houses, trimmed lawns, friendly retirees, and an HOA fee small enough that I didn't think twice about it. The real prize, though, was my two-car garage, the place I planned to turn into a workshop, a sanctuary, and eventually Emma's treehouse headquarters. Life was supposed to get simpler here. Instead, I ended up dealing with a woman who treated the neighborhood like her kingdom and every driveway like her personal runway. Enter Brenda Whitfield, our HOA treasurer, or as the neighborhood whispered, the woman who could find a violation inside a locked toolbox. She was the type who walked her tiny designer dog with one hand and measured grass height with the other. Always an expensive perfume, always armed with a clipboard, and always ready to remind you that her husband worked in city planning, just in case she needed to make your life difficult. My first real run-in with her happened 6 months after I moved in. I was installing safety lighting for Mrs. Chen when I heard that unmistakable click of high heels marching toward unsuspecting victims. Before I even turned around, I caught a whiff of perfume that probably cost more than my utility bill. "I don't see a permit posted for this work," she declared, holding her clipboard like a badge. I explained that outdoor lighting didn't need a permit, showed her my license, even offered to walk her through the codes. She looked at my credentials the way someone looks at a suspicious coupon, annoyed and unconvinced. "I'll be verifying that with my husband. We can't have questionable work compromising our community standards." That was my official welcome to Brenda's kingdom. Over the next months, she turned minor HOA rules into full-blown power plays. From citing neighbors for leaving trash cans out 10 minutes too long to harassing a veteran's widow over wind chimes she claimed were aesthetic threats. But all of that was nothing compared to what happened the night I came home exhausted from a 12-hour shift and found her luxury SUV parked squarely in my garage without a word. Because what I did next, locking the garage, recording everything, and then leaving for a 2-week off-grid vacation, started a chain reaction that would blow her entire operation wide open. When I stepped out of my truck that night, boots heavy, shoulders aching, all I wanted was a cold drink and 10 quiet minutes in my workshop. I'd just finished a grueling emergency power installation at a medical clinic, and my whole body felt like it was made of rebar. But the second my garage door rolled up, any hope of peace evaporated. There it was. Brenda's gleaming pearl-white BMW X5, parked dead center in my garage, perfectly aligned, perfectly smug, perfectly out of place. Not slightly in the way. Not squeezed to one corner. No. She had positioned her SUV with the precision of a surgeon, leaving barely enough room to slip a hand between her doors and my workbench. The smell of her fancy leather mixed with sawdust and motor oil in a way that made my stomach twist. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if exhaustion had made me hallucinate. Then her car chirped, a soft, arrogant beep that felt like it was mocking me. I walked around to my porch, and that's where I found her, Brenda herself, sitting in my patio chair like she'd scheduled a personal meeting on my property. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, scrolling through her phone like nothing in the world was out of order. "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you parked in my garage." She didn't even flinch. "Oh, Jake," she said lightly, "my driveway is being sealed tomorrow. Temporary situation. The HOA's emergency parking clause allows use of community spaces during maintenance." I'd read every word of the bylaws when I bought the house, and I sure didn't remember any emergency parking clause. So I pulled up the documents on my phone. She watched me with a smirk like I was a kid trying to assemble furniture without instructions. "I don't see anything like that," I told her. "Well," she replied, standing up and smoothing her skirt, "I'm in the process of revising the regulations. Consider this a pilot test of community cooperation." Pilot test. On my private property. Most folks would have exploded right there. But 12 years of electrical work teaches you one thing above all: patience. Instead of shouting, I calmly lifted my phone, hit record, and asked, "So you're confirming this rule doesn't actually exist yet, and you used my garage without permission?" She went pale. A clean, instant drop of color. "You can't record me without consent," she snapped. "Oh, I can," I said. "This is my property, and this state only requires one-party consent." That rattled her. She backed away, muttering something about her husband hearing about this. But the next morning, she struck back. A bright orange HOA violation was taped to my front door. Garage left open overnight, visual blight. Fine, $75, escalating to $200. The same garage she had occupied. But that petty violation wasn't the real punch, because what she didn't know was that her little stunt had just handed me the first piece of evidence that would eventually destroy her entire empire. I stared at that bright orange violation notice like it was some kind of joke. Garage left open overnight. The same garage she had invaded, blocked, and treated like community storage. And right beneath the printed fine was Brenda's elegant little handwritten message. "Maybe next time you'll be more cooperative. Be cooperative. In other words, obey me or I'll make your life miserable." I snapped a photo and immediately called my friend Derek, college roommate turned real estate attorney, the guy who knew housing laws better than anyone I'd ever met. When I read him the violation, he actually laughed. "Jake," he said, "she just handed you the best evidence you could ask for. She caused the issue, then fined you for it. That's abuse of authority and harassment." That got my attention. "So what do I do?" I asked. "Simple," he said. "Start digging. HOA formation documents are public record. Find out what powers they actually have. Don't take Brenda's word for anything." So during lunch, I drove down to the county courthouse. The air smelled like old carpet and cheap institutional coffee, the usual government building perfume. I spent an hour flipping through dusty binders and digital archives until something caught my eye. A discrepancy. A big one. The HOA's internal boundary map didn't match the official county survey. Their version was based on a preliminary plan that was never finalized. My property line, specifically my garage, extended farther than the HOA believed it did. Meaning their authority over my garage space? Legally flimsy at best, non-existent at worst. And if I had an incorrect boundary, who else did? I left the courthouse with the first real smile I'd had since this feud began. But while I was discovering loopholes, Brenda was busy escalating. When I got home, she'd emailed the entire neighborhood. A dramatic, fear-mongering message titled, "Urgent Community Notice, Security Risk Due to Unsecured Garage." She blamed me for creating safety hazards, hinted at ongoing behavior patterns, and announced that the HOA board was considering enhanced enforcement. Enhanced enforcement basically meant one thing. Brenda wanted more power. I checked my phone and saw 3 texts from Emma. "Daddy, will my treehouse be ready? Can we paint it blue? Is the mean lady being mean again?" I typed back, "We might need to adjust the plan, sweetheart. But don't worry, Daddy is learning how to fight mean people the right way." What I didn't tell her was that my courthouse discovery was bigger than I thought. And I wasn't the only name in those HOA files Brenda didn't want anyone else to see. Because when I woke up the next morning and saw what Brenda had done in my garage, it became clear this wasn't a feud anymore, it was an all-out invasion. I stared at that bright orange violation notice like it was some kind of joke. Garage left open overnight. The same garage she had invaded, blocked, and treated like community storage. And right beneath the printed fine was Brenda's elegant little handwritten message. "Maybe next time you'll be more cooperative. Be cooperative. In other words, obey me or I'll make your life miserable." I snapped a photo and immediately called my friend Derek, college roommate turned real estate attorney, the guy who knew housing laws better than anyone I'd ever met. When I read him the violation, he actually laughed. "Jake," he said, "she just handed you the best evidence you could ask for. She caused the issue, then fined you for it. That's abuse of authority and harassment. That got my attention. So what do I do? I asked. Simple, he said. Start digging. HOA formation documents are public record. Find out what powers they actually have. Don't take Brenda's word for anything. So during lunch, I drove down to the county courthouse. The air smelled like old carpet and cheap institutional coffee, the usual government building perfume. I spent an hour flipping through dusty binders and digital archives until something caught my eye. A discrepancy. A big one. The HOA's internal boundary map didn't match the official county survey. Their version was based on a preliminary plan that was never finalized. My property line, specifically my garage, extended farther than the HOA believed it did. Meaning their authority over my garage space? Legally flimsy at best, non-existent at worst. And if I had an incorrect boundary, who else did? I left the courthouse with the first real smile I'd had since this feud began. But while I was discovering loopholes, Brenda was busy escalating. When I got home, she'd emailed the entire neighborhood. A dramatic, fear-mongering message titled, "Urgent Community Notice, Security Risk Due to Unsecured Garage." She blamed me for creating safety hazards, hinted at ongoing behavior patterns, and announced that the HOA board was considering enhanced enforcement. Enhanced enforcement basically meant one thing. Brenda wanted more power. I checked my phone and saw 3 texts from Emma. "Daddy, will my treehouse be ready? Can we paint it blue? Is the mean lady being mean again?" I typed back, "We might need to adjust the plan, sweetheart. But don't worry, Daddy is learning how to fight mean people the right way." What I didn't tell her was that my courthouse discovery was bigger than I thought. And I wasn't the only name in those HOA files Brenda didn't want anyone else to see. Because when I woke up the next morning and saw what Brenda had done in my garage, it became clear this wasn't a feud anymore, it was an all-out invasion. The next morning, I stepped into my garage expecting to see the same BMW still squatting in the center. What I didn't expect was a second car. A sleek black Mercedes sedan, a newer model, spotless and smug, tucked neatly beside the BMW like Brenda had decided my garage was now her personal luxury showroom. 2 high-end vehicles taking up every inch of space where my tools, projects, and sanity used to live. But the real punch to the gut wasn't the cars. It was the padlock. My electrical supply cabinet, the one I had locked with my own latch, now had a brand new commercial-grade lock hanging from it. My lock was gone. My tools were shoved and scattered across the workbench like someone had rummaged through a junk drawer, not thousands of dollars of equipment I depended on for my livelihood. And sitting right on my grandfather's old vise was a sticky note. Temporary relocation for staging purposes. Community cooperation appreciated. BW. She wasn't even pretending anymore. I felt that metallic taste of anger rise in my throat, the kind you feel right before you say something you'll regret. Instead, I forced myself to breathe. 12 years around high voltage teaches you not to act until your mind is grounded. So I grabbed my phone. And I called the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived 20 minutes later, Martinez, a solid guy with that tired but confident look cops get when they've handled too many suburban disputes. He walked the garage, took photos, asked questions, and didn't hide his irritation when he saw the padlock. "Sir," he said, "this looks like harassment. And possibly unlawful entry. Mind if I talk to the vehicle owner?" I invited him to do so with the biggest internal smile I'd had in days. Watching Brenda try to explain to a police officer why she believed she had the right to commandeer someone else's garage was pure theater. Her voice got higher, her excuses more desperate, her hands fluttering like confused birds. Officer Martinez finally stopped her mid-sentence. "Ma'am, property deeds override HOA preferences. If these vehicles aren't removed, this becomes a criminal matter." Her face dropped like a bad stock market chart. But I wasn't done. That afternoon, I drove straight to the county surveyor's office. If Brenda wanted to push boundaries, I wanted to know exactly where those boundaries were, legally, physically, and permanently. The clerk, Janet, pulled up my lot survey and pointed at the screen with a grin. "Oh, honey, you own more land than your HOA says you do. 18 extra inches toward the street. That garage? 100% on your private property." Meaning Brenda had claimed authority over land she didn't legally control. Meaning everything she'd done was built on a faulty foundation. Meaning I now had something extremely powerful. Because once Brenda realized I knew the truth about my property line, she didn't back off, she went nuclear. And her next move was so wild it dragged the entire neighborhood into the fight. When I saw that bright yellow towing notice slapped onto my work van, the van parked legally on a public street, I didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to know who was behind it. Brenda might have written the HOA rules in crayon and called them law, but city towing? That wasn't her department. That had Brad Whitfield written all over it. Brad, her husband, the golden boy of city planning, who loved to talk about zoning like it was a weapon only he could wield. Apparently, they'd both decided to drag this fight into a whole new arena. I took a deep breath, snapped photos from every angle, and sent them to Derek with a message. "I think the Whitfields just made a government-level mistake." His reply came 10 seconds later. "They absolutely did. But neighborhood drama doesn't pause for legal analysis." Because that same afternoon, Brenda launched a full-blown social media smear campaign. On the neighborhood Facebook group, she posted, "Some residents prioritize vacations and personal projects over community safety." Below it was a photo, cropped and framed to look dramatic, of my garage door open from the night she left her SUV inside it. She claimed I was creating security hazards. She said I refused to comply with community standards. She hinted that multiple neighbors had complained. I refreshed the comments section every minute, expecting a mob. Instead, Brenda got roasted. Mrs. Chin commented, "My husband served this country for 32 years. Our wind chimes were a threat too. This is harassment." Tom Rodriguez jumped in with, "Brenda, my work truck never bothered anyone until you tried to tow it. Funny how that works." And then came the cherry on top, a comment from Janet Martinez. "Some people think their spouse's job gives them authority they don't actually have." Janet Martinez. Officer Martinez's wife. The same officer who had watched Brenda completely implode in my driveway. Within 2 hours, Brenda's post had more eye-roll emojis than supportive comments. But she still wasn't done. Sunday night, Emma called from her mom's place, excited about her upcoming visit. "Daddy, is my treehouse almost ready?" I forced a smile she couldn't see. "Almost, sweetheart. Just a small delay. Is the mean lady doing mean things again? Kids always cut straight through the nonsense." "Yeah," I admitted. "But Daddy's handling it." What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent the afternoon at the county surveyor's office confirming every detail of my property lines. And what I found wasn't just helpful, it was explosive. My deed showed precise legal boundaries that the HOA documents didn't match. The HOA had used an old preliminary map for years, an outdated, non-binding version. Meaning Brenda had been enforcing rules on land she didn't legally govern. And if the HOA boundaries were wrong for me, they were probably wrong for everyone. Which meant this wasn't just harassment anymore. It was systemic abuse. But the real shock came the next day, when Brenda didn't just trespass again, she brought backup. And what they tried to do inside my garage crossed the line into actual criminal territory. By Monday morning, I was fully expecting some sort of retaliation from Brenda, but nothing prepared me for what I found when I walked toward my garage. Not only were both luxury vehicles still sitting there, untouched like trophies in a museum, but someone had clearly been inside overnight. And this time, Brenda hadn't come alone. Scratches around the lock. Footprints on my concrete floor. A faint smell of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. And my tool cabinet, the one she had already padlocked, now had visible pry marks around the hinges. It didn't take a genius to realize someone had tried to break in. I checked the security footage Tom helped me set up, military-grade cameras he'd quietly installed around my property that uploaded everything to a cloud Brenda couldn't tamper with. And there it was, in crystal-clear detail. A man, mid-30s, dressed in all black, cutting across my lawn at 2:11 a.m., bolt cutters in hand. He walked directly to my garage door, glanced around once, and started working the lock like it was just another Tuesday night errand. 30 seconds later, the familiar sweep of headlights appeared. Tom's truck. On the footage, Tom stepped out calmly, like catching an intruder was part of his morning routine. The man froze. Tom asked who he was. The guy blurted out, "I'm with the HOA. I was sent to retrieve staging materials." Staging materials, meaning my tools. Tom asked for his contractor's license. He didn't have one. Tom asked for the HOA work order. He pulled out a handwritten note on Brenda's personal stationery. That was all Tom needed. He called the police on the spot. Officer Martinez arrived, and the moment he saw the bolt cutters, the lie, and the fake work order, his patience evaporated. Under pressure, the intruder immediately said the magic words. "Brenda hired me." It was a confession wrapped with a bow. But the nightmare for Brenda wasn't over. Because later that morning, the Attorney General's office, yes, the State Attorney General, executed a search warrant on Brenda's house. And the best part? Channel 7 News was right there filming the entire thing. Neighbors spilled out onto their lawns to watch Brenda in her bathrobe screaming about unlawful targeting while state investigators hauled out boxes of files, computers, and receipts. Brad was arrested at his office an hour later, stunned, fumbling, and stripped of all that smug authority he once threw around so casually. But the real bombshell came from Sarah, who had screenshots from the AG's press briefing. Turns out, Brenda and Brad weren't just power-tripping HOA tyrants. They were part of a county-wide property manipulation scheme that had targeted dozens of families. And as the dust settled, the investigators told me something that turned my entire stomach upside down. My case wasn't just evidence, it was the spark that blew the whole conspiracy open. The morning after the break-in attempt, I was still replaying the security footage in my head, the bolt cutters, the fake contractor, the panic in his voice when Tom cornered him. I knew things were bad, but I didn't realize just how fast they were about to escalate. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed with Derek's name. And Derek never calls early unless the world is burning. "Jake," he said, breathless, "you're not going to believe this. The Attorney General's office just contacted me." I sat down at my kitchen table, the coffee in my mug suddenly tasting like nothing. "They want to speak with you as an official witness. Not just about your garage, but about the entire HOA." My heartbeat kicked up. "What do you mean the entire HOA?" Derek shuffled papers on his end. I could hear the tension in his movements. "Because, my friend, they found something during the search warrant yesterday. Something big." I braced myself. "Jake, they uncovered a master spreadsheet." Those words alone sent a cold shiver down my spine. "A spreadsheet?" I asked. "Yes," he said, voice low. "A document mapping out homeowners across multiple neighborhoods, people Brenda and Brad strategically targeted." I stayed silent, letting the weight of that sink in. They listed who was vulnerable, who could be pressured, who didn't know their rights. "And you're on the list." I exhaled slowly. "Of course I was." "What does it say about me?" I asked. Derek hesitated, which was never a good sign. "It labels you, Morrison, single father, tradesman, corner property with high development potential. Apply financial stress via family-related leverage." They had written down my daughter like she was a weakness to exploit. That crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Derek continued, "Mrs. Chen was flagged as elderly, easy to intimidate with safety concerns. Tom was listed as blue-collar, avoid legal escalation." There were dozens of names, dozens. My anger wasn't just personal anymore. It was moral. This wasn't HOA strictness. This was a playbook, a system designed to squeeze people until they sold below market value. Around noon, Sarah sent updates from the AG and screenshots from local reporters. The picture the investigators were painting was worse than any of us imagined. Brenda hadn't just been abusing HOA power. The picture the investigators were painting was worse than any of us imagined. Brenda hadn't just been abusing HOA power. She'd been using it as a business model. Every violation she wrote. Every fake rule. Every urgent notice. It was all part of a coordinated scheme to force homeowners out and flip their properties through her real estate company. Brad used city planning intel to pick the best targets. Brenda applied pressure. They pocketed the profits. A criminal enterprise disguised as bureaucracy. And my case, the garage, the recordings, the police reports, had connected the final dots. But just when we thought the investigation had peaked, Brenda did something that no one saw coming. Because within 24 hours, Brenda pulled off one last desperate stunt, a move so reckless that it became the final blow that ended her entire operation for good. By the time the Attorney General's office wrapped up their first round of questioning, I assumed Brenda would finally stay quiet. After all, her house had been raided, her husband had been arrested, and half the county had watched it happen on the morning news. Any rational person would have lawyered up and disappeared into silence. But Brenda wasn't rational. She was desperate. And nothing is more dangerous than a desperate HOA dictator who believes she's losing control of her kingdom. It started with a voicemail. Then another. And another. 17 voicemails in 24 hours. Each one more frantic than the last. The first messages were defiant. Jake, you need to come home and resolve this garage situation immediately. The board is preparing additional enforcement actions. 2 hours later, the tone slipped. You're making a mistake challenging the HOA. You don't understand how much influence Brad has. By voicemail number 9, her voice had cracked. Please, just call me back. We can work something out. But voicemail number 14? That one wasn't anger or authority. It was fear. Jake, they're taking everything. The investigators, they seized my files, my accounts. Brad won't come home. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Her crumble would have been tragic if she hadn't spent years destroying other people's finances and peace of mind. Around noon, Sarah messaged. Jake, she's on Facebook again. You need to see this. Brenda had posted a long, frantic message on the neighborhood group, a rambling essay accusing the entire community of turning against her. She blamed me, blamed the police, blamed ignorant residents who don't understand governance, and even accused Mrs. Chen of espionage. Mrs. Chen. A grandmother who grew roses and baked almond cookies. The comments section erupted instantly, and none of them sided with her. Neighbors she'd bullied for years finally unleashed everything they'd held back. Brenda, you fined me $50 because my Halloween pumpkin wasn't symmetrical. Remember when you tried to ban my kids' chalk drawings? You called my front yard emotionally disturbing because I planted a red bush. But the true meltdown came when Brenda appeared in person. Tom caught it on video. She marched down the street sobbing, mascara streaked, screaming about false accusations and ungrateful residents. She pounded on 3 neighbors' doors. She waved papers in the air claiming innocence. She even tried to confront Officer Martinez on his lunch break. He simply pointed her back toward her home and said, "Ma'am, stop digging." But the moment that sealed her fate was the very last voicemail she left me. At 3:12 a.m., her voice barely a whisper, she said, "Jake, if you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything. Please. I'll do anything. I'll even buy your house for above market value. Just make this go away." That was the exact moment the investigators needed, the final piece proving coercion, bribery, and intent. Brenda didn't know it yet, but she had just detonated her own case. And while her empire was collapsing, Emma and I were driving home, unaware that our return would turn into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle waiting in the driveway. 14 days after I'd locked my garage, taken Emma camping, and left Brenda's empire to collapse on its own weight, we finally drove back into Willowbrook Estates. Emma was half asleep with her stuffed bunny under her arm, and I was just hoping to take a hot shower and maybe get a normal night's rest. But the moment we turned onto my street, I realized rest wasn't happening anytime soon. 3 news vans were parked along the curb, satellite dishes pointed toward the sky. Neighbors were gathered in small groups, whispering, pointing, watching. And at the center of it all, like the last stubborn reminder of 2 weeks of chaos, sat Brenda's abandoned BMW still parked in my garage, police tape fluttering across the doorway. "Daddy, why are there cameras?" Emma asked, pressing her face to the window. "Because sometimes when people do the wrong thing for too long," I said, "the world finally pays attention." Tom met us before I even shut the truck door. He looked like he'd slept about 20 minutes in 2 weeks, but he was grinning ear to ear. "Welcome home, brother," he said, handing me a thick folder. "You're going to want to see this." Inside the folder was a meticulously organized breakdown of everything that had happened while I was gone. 17 break-in attempts. 3 police reports. 1 arrest. Dozens of screenshots. Full surveillance logs. And a neighborhood statement signed by 42 families. It was enough evidence to launch a documentary. Before I could process it, the producer from Channel 7 jogged over. "Jake, we'd like to interview you in about an hour. Your story is shaping up to be the biggest HOA scandal the state's ever seen." Fantastic. Exactly what every tired electrician wants after a 14-hour drive home. The interview took place in Mrs. Chen's yard, with my garage clearly visible behind us, BMW, police tape, padlocks, and all. The reporter asked questions about harassment, trespassing, the break-ins, the towing attempt, and how I uncovered the boundary map discrepancies. But the most surreal moment was when Detective Rodriguez arrived, crisp uniform, serious expression, to brief me on the case updates. "Mr. Morrison," she said, flipping through her notepad, "your documentation and the evidence collected by your neighbors have led to charges against 14 individuals across 6 counties. This is the largest HOA corruption case we've ever seen. 14. Across 6 counties. All connected. My garage, the same garage Brenda had treated as her personal showroom, had become ground zero for dismantling an entire criminal network." That night, Sarah organized a community accountability meeting at the elementary school cafeteria. The room was packed, dozens of families, cameras, reporters, legal reps, and neighbors who'd been bullied for years finally ready to speak. Derek stood in front of everyone and delivered the final update. Brenda's real estate license has been permanently revoked. Brad has been terminated from city planning. Their house is entering foreclosure. And the state has filed federal conspiracy and fraud charges. The room erupted into applause so loud it shook the plastic chairs. But the moment that truly broke the tension, the moment that made every neighbor laugh, gasp, and cheer, was when they played Brenda's voicemails over the speaker system. 17 messages. 17 stages of panic. 17 accidental confessions. By the last one, the room wasn't angry anymore. They were relieved. Because the tyrant of Willowbrook was gone. But even after the applause, the interviews, and the legal victories, something else was still waiting, a twist involving my property, my treehouse plans, and a loophole Brenda never knew existed. Even after the explosion of interviews, reports, and legal fireworks, I thought things would finally slow down. For the first time in what felt like forever, I tucked Emma into bed, kissed her forehead, and walked out into the quiet hallway of my own home. No pounding on my door. No fake violations taped to my window. No patrol lights flashing across the street. Just silence. But silence in Willowbrook didn't last long. The very next morning, Derek knocked on my door with a stack of documents thicker than a phone book. He stepped inside, dropped the stack onto my dining table, and said, "Jake, you need to sit. This is about your property deed." "Ah, yes." Because after surviving a criminal HOA syndicate, the universe clearly felt I needed one more twist. I sat down, already bracing myself. "You remember how you found out the HOA was using an outdated map?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "The surveyor confirmed it." "Well," Derek said, flipping to a highlighted page, "your land extends farther than what the HOA thought. Specifically, this entire triangular strip behind your garage? It's legally yours." I blinked. The section Brenda claimed belonged to the community? Exactly that one. It took a second for the realization to click. That patch of land, the one Brenda tried to find me over when Emma and I staked out flags for the treehouse? The one she treated as her personal fiefdom? That land was mine. Every inch of it. Derek kept flipping through pages. And because the HOA filed fraudulent violations based on an invalid map, every fine they ever issued against you is null. You're entitled to full reimbursement. That part didn't shock me. But what he said next did. Given the size of the fraud case, and your role in exposing it, the county is granting you a development exemption. You're allowed to make improvements to your property without HOA review for the next 5 years. I stared at him. "You mean?" "Yes," he said, smiling. "You can build your daughter's treehouse. Exactly how you planned. No restrictions. No approvals. No Brenda." For the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. A weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying finally lifted. Emma's treehouse, the thing she'd talked about nonstop, was no longer a battle. It was a promise. That afternoon, Tom and Mr. Jenkins came over with fresh lumber, a set of blueprints, and 3 coolers of lemonade. The whole neighborhood seemed ready to help. Mrs. Chin brought snacks. The Rodriguez kids brought nails. Even people who barely spoke during the scandal showed up just to be a part of something positive. As we measured the posts, marked the beams, and laughed under the afternoon sun, I finally understood something. This community wasn't broken. It had just been suppressed. Without Brenda's shadow, Willowbrook actually felt like a neighborhood worth being part of. By sunset, the foundation was in place. Emma stood on the platform with wide eyes and a smile that made every miserable day worth it. But before we packed up, Tom nudged me with his elbow. "You know," he said, "there's one more surprise coming your way. Something big." I raised an eyebrow. "Bigger than all this?" "Oh yeah," he said. "And you're going to want to sit down for that one." Because the next morning, I received a letter, not from the HOA, not from the county, but from someone whose name alone changed everything about what came next. The next morning, I found a crisp white envelope tucked neatly under my front doormat, the kind of envelope that didn't come from neighbors or delivery drivers. No return address. Just my full legal name typed across the front in sharp, clean lettering. I knew instantly it wasn't junk mail. I brought it inside, set it on the counter, and stared at it for a long moment. After everything that had happened, the investigations, the break-ins, the interviews, an unmarked letter was enough to make my stomach tighten. Emma wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, who's the letter from?" "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But let's find out." Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, official stationery, with a raised seal stamped at the bottom. And when I read the name at the top, I froze. Office of the State Attorney General. Not the investigators, not the detectives, the Attorney General himself. The letter thanked me for my cooperation, my evidence, and the clarity my documentation brought to the case. Then it got to the real reason they reached out. "Your actions directly enabled the prevention of further fraudulent property seizures across the county." They weren't exaggerating. The spreadsheets, the break-in footage, the fake work orders, all of it formed the backbone of a case against more than a dozen officials and HOA board members. But the letter didn't end with thanks. It continued. "Given the scope of the fraud, and your role in uncovering it, our office has authorized a victim restitution grant to compensate for damages, legal expenses, and loss of income resulting from HOA interference. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. A grant. From the state. To me. It wasn't a small amount either. The figure at the bottom of the page made me blink hard. It was more than enough to cover the damage, the stolen time, the stalled projects, and still have plenty left to turn that treehouse into something special. Something more than just a backyard platform. But the letter had one more twist. Additionally, this case has drawn national interest. We request this too, he said. It wasn't from the AG. It wasn't from the county. It was something entirely unexpected. Because inside that envelope was a proposal, one that would change my future, my neighborhood, and everything I thought I knew about HOAs. When Tom handed me the second envelope, he wore that smirk, the same one he gets when he knows he's about to drop a bombshell and wants to savor the moment. The paper was thick, the seal embossed, and unlike the Attorney General's letter, this one did have a return address. It was from Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, Interim Board of Directors. Don't worry, Tom said, raising both hands. It's not what you think. Just open it. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a multi-page document, neatly typed, with a header that immediately caught my eye. Proposal for permanent HOA board restructuring and leadership appointment. I blinked. What, leadership appointment? Tom grinned wider. Keep reading. The proposal outlined everything that had happened over the past month, the fraud, the arrests, the illegal property manipulation, the misuse of authority, the community testimony. And then, at the center of the document, in bold, the homeowners of Willowbrook Estates unanimously nominate Jacob Morrison for board president. I stared at the words, stunned. Me? President? The same HOA I'd been battling for weeks was now offering me the top seat. Tom rested a hand on my shoulder. Jake, the neighborhood trusts you. They want someone honest. Someone who won't weaponize rules. Someone who actually cares about people. Across the yard, neighbors waved while helping Emma paint the treehouse railings. Mrs. Chin held up a tray of cookies. The Rodriguez kids hammered posts. Even Sarah, who had been the unofficial PR manager for the entire scandal, gave me a thumbs up. Every face said the same thing. We're ready for something better. But I wasn't sure. I don't know, Tom. After everything? I just wanted a quiet life. Tom chuckled. Exactly why you're perfect for the job. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I walked up the nearly finished treehouse with Emma. She stood beside me, looking out over the yard with a big, hopeful smile. Daddy, she said softly, you always fix broken things. Maybe you can fix our neighborhood too. Kids always understand more than we think. I looked at the letter again, the signatures of dozens of neighbors, and the blank line at the bottom where acceptance was supposed to go. I imagined a community without fear. Without fines for nonsense. Without someone like Brenda waiting to pounce on every small thing. A neighborhood where people actually felt at home. Maybe taking the role wasn't about power. Maybe it was about protecting my daughter's future and everyone else's. So I signed. When I handed the document back to Tom, he let out a triumphant laugh. Well then, Mr. President, he said, clapping my back, let's build a neighborhood worth living in. The next morning, the news headline read, Local father who exposed HOA corruption named new HOA president. Emma taped it to the refrigerator with stickers. My garage was finally mine again. The community was healing. The treehouse stood tall and bright behind the house. And for the first time since moving to Willowbrook, I felt something simple and rare. Peace. But little did I know, my first week as HOA president would uncover one last hidden file in Brenda's old office, a file that hinted she wasn't the only one with secrets.